You're listening to the New Story podcast from New Story Church in Kansas City. To learn more about New Story Church, visit our website at www.newstory.church.
Mountain Dew hire us for a commercial for Baja Blast. We got you. Welcome everybody to the Equip Podcast, equipping you to live out your Christian life as you faithfully love God and love others with truth and grace. My name's Jeremy. I am one of the pastors at New Story Church. I have that privilege. Thankful to be here. And we have the newest addition to our pastoral team, Pierce. Say hey.
Hello, and I've been here 6 months.
6 months when? Today? No, like in a week.
2 days.
In 2 days.
Yeah, because today's 16th. I
October
moved on the
18th.
18th.
All right, dude. Well, welcome. How have your first, real talk, how's your first 6 months been?
Working with you has been a joy.
Okay, no, listen, I said real talk. Stop it.
Oh, real talk, working with you has been
Okay, listen.
a joy. It was real talk.
Yeah, but Kansas City versus Texas, big kind of shift in
Big
culture
shift.
and
So much better.
And our church environment too is a little bit different, or the kind of system that we exist in is a little bit different too.
Yeah, love it here. Fantastic.
Cool. That's it. That's all you got.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I just enjoyed being here. My wife and I have zero conundrums, zero hesitancy, zero, anything. We're just good. So
Cool. I'm glad. Other than the house, if anyone knows of a good house within 15 minutes of New Story Church, that is within a decent budget line for them, reach out. They're taking any suggestion at this point.
Well, not any
That's not true.
suggestion. Yeah.
They've looked at several and just it's not fitting kind of their needs, and the state of the economy is not really helping things, or at least the state of the housing market in particular is not really helping anything. So. Anyway,
not about me.
Not about you. We're glad you're here. And I'm glad to have you here all the time to where we can do these podcasts. And we need to bring Dennis back in. It's been a minute. But yeah. Well, today we have a couple things we're going to get into that I think will be good. We don't have any big cultural things right now. We could discuss what's happening in Israel at the moment with Iran shooting rockets, but I don't feel quite prepared to dive into that all the way. I could just report to you the news, but you can find that anywhere. I would, I guess, maybe use it as a plug to look at or look up and listen to Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar. You can find that on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, stuff like that. Great resource for hearing the news and just not as biased of a take as you'll find in our legacy media. So very thankful for them and what they do. It's one of the few things that I will endorse as a news program that I financially support because I appreciate what they're doing. So I encourage you to look them up. But anyway, I want to start off the way we always start off with Pierce's favorite segment. I need to have a jingle. I need to write a jingle for this.
Yeah, just produce it by the time we do our next one next week. For
Pierce, the riddle. A riddle with Pierce. Okay. You got last week's.
Yep.
That's 1 for 6. Let's see how you do today. Okay. What can you hold in your right hand that you can never hold in your left hand?
What can you hold in your right hand that you can never hold in your left hand? I'm looking at my hands right now.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
What can I hold in my right hand that I will never be able to hold in my left hand?
Right.
My thought is my
elbow.
Okay. What can I hold in my right hand that I will never, not just ever, but never ever in my left hand?
And if you're listening, you may know this, but I don't know if you've heard this riddle before, but feel free to email us at info@newstory.church and let us know that you know the answer.
Because I do not know the answer. and creatively thinking and critically thinking and problem solving right now for my right hand overposed to my left hand, something I will never be able to grab.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say, on the elbow thing, you're getting warmer.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Okay, I don't know. I spent too much time on this.
Well, let me illustrate it for. What can you hold in your left hand that you'll never be able to hold in, or what was it? Dang it.
What can you hold in your right hand that you'll never be able to hold in your left hand?
Yes. What can you hold in your right hand?
My right hand.
Correct. Or what can you hold in your right hand that you can never hold in your left hand? You can never hold your left hand in your hand, barring some like really. Wait, no. Even if your hand got chopped off, you don't have a hand to hold it in. So yeah. What can you hold in your right hand that you can never hold in your left hand? And the answer is your left hand.
Huh.
There you go.
Interesting. I thought
Pierce
I had
is
that.
now holding his hands.
I had that thought. I do have paint on it, but I had that thought. It was like it has to be my hand, but I was like, that doesn't make sense because I kept trying I was like
gripping his hands, like I'm holding them, right? Is that holding them?
Does that count?
Well, anyway, hopefully by next week we'll have a little jingle in here for Riddles with Pierce. Let's do a quick fun fact with Pierce. Tell people your real name.
Kevin. I have 4 names.
Tell them your whole name.
Okay. Kevin Christopher Pierce Gibson.
No. Now, how did which is wild, first of all, how did your parents decide we're going to give him 4 names, but we're going to say he's going to go by his third?
Okay, so my mom was worried about identity theft. And so we got 4 names. And then I'm a twin. So then my brother is older than me. My
People
dad's,
may not know that too.
Yeah, which you wouldn't know that. We look zero alike.
Yeah.
But then my dad goes by his middle name, and his name is James Kevin. So since I was younger of my brother took James and I took Kevin. And then my mom's dad was like, well, they need Christian names. And so, which I don't know why, but it is what it is. So my brother got Christian, I got Christopher. Mm-hmm. And then they said my mom always liked the name Hunter, and my dad liked the name Pearson for a girl.
Okay.
Because it was like a last name of an inmate at the prison he worked at. And so then, I'm telling you, dude. And so then when they found out they were having...
The story of how you got it is better than you having 4 names.
Yeah, and so by the time, when they found out they're having boys, they had already liked the kind of name Pearson for a girl, and so they just dropped the N. And my dad was like, what about Pierce? So Kevin Christopher Pierce.
So you're named after an inmate at a prison.
Partially.
Yeah,
that happens.
And your father and a Christian. Well, here we are.
Bearer of Christ.
Well, that's funny. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, one, you have 4 names, that your actual name is Kevin, and that you are a twin. So there you go. Another person on our staff is a twin that a lot of people don't realize too. Joel Ulrich, our tech coordinator, he is also a twin. Did you not know that?
No, wait a minute. I might have. Maybe not.
You wouldn't. It's similar. You wouldn't be able to tell. Yep. So, anyway, well, let's get into our main topics of discussion today. I just want to kind of review a little bit from Sunday, add a little bit further commentary or context to certain things that I think will be helpful for us. But we went back to Colossians 3, which I'll go ahead and open here real quick. Open on my phone. Colossians 3. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. I love the Bible app. Yes, I love the Bible app. Don't ask me another question. It does. It's like, do you like the Bible app? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, tell us why. And no, just take my answer. Let me go. Okay, Colossians 3. Patience, Jeremy. We're going to learn about that. I'm going to read our text from Sunday again, and then we'll kind of talk about it a little bit more. But Colossians 3, verse 5 says, "Put to death, therefore, in light of your new life in Christ, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, which is sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry." Verse 6, "Because of these, the wrath of God is coming." Verse 7, "You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. And describing the church, verse 11, here in this place there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. The overall principle here is putting to death things that, of our old life, and putting. It doesn't give kind of the old adage of the kind of put off, put on principle that Paul talks about several times throughout Scripture, but put on things that are your new life in Christ, because you have been raised with Christ. You're kingdom people now, so put to death these old ways. And what we talked about Sunday, and kind of looking into verse 11 as well, is that the church is supposed to be the place that is most like heaven on earth, this side of eternity. And when we're out here popping off with how we speak and acting foolish, what does that say to our world? What does it say to our world when we really look no different than them? And often we can think we look different because of how we dress or we believe certain things. But when we look no different in how we act and how we speak, what does that tell our world? And what does that tell our world, not just about the church, but about Jesus' kingdom that we're supposed to be building here, this side of eternity? Now, there were a few on that list that I think stuck out to for us as not just News Story, but just the kind of the Church of America. And what were those three, Pierce, that kind of stood out?
Slander, rage, and then dishonesty.
Yeah. And the idea of our, because Paul makes it a priority of gaining the respect of outsiders and acting a certain way, living a certain way to earn the respect, because they're watching. So if we're going to try and gain the respect of outsiders, people that aren't Christians, that's why we put off these things. And three things in particular, slander, rage, dishonesty. What have you seen? If you can feel or think of stuff off the dome, what have you seen as far as slander, rage, dishonesty? Have you seen those pop up in the church?
Yeah, within the church. I feel like maybe in the sense is the dishonesty, I think, aspect of it is because we can paint or we just leave out or omit different things, and so we whereas some things are very valid and very true and very true statements and very matter of fact, but then we just happen to omit certain facts or different details and just don't address those. And then
sense of omission in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense. And I think that's probably what we see the most often. And now I will say, you definitely see, I'm trying to think within the church.
Yeah.
You definitely see online, you see the slandering definitely happening. You see that, every commercial, you see that, especially with the campaign ones, that's literally most of them, is doing that. But trying to be more specific, I feel like the dishonesty one is something we see a lot. And if you do happen to see the slander one, it's hush hush. And it's or it's you're in a room of people who all think the same thing, and so then you're just all going to collectively agree on this thing, and it's oh yeah, you're right, you're right, and then what about this, and then it kind of feeds off one another, and but then what we end up doing is slandering, and but I feel like the dishonesty is we'll leave out important things, or just to create our case, to make our point, to to convince somebody, if we can, we'll leave out these other things that kind of makes our argument fall apart.
Yeah, and that's just general principles of debate and discussion, though that's not going to get you anywhere. We'll talk about this a little bit this next week, but that's an important principle of being able to present the other side of an argument in a way in which they would agree with it. Because if you can't do that, and then you present yours, what are you really fighting against, or what are you really presenting your case against? You're presenting your case against what's called a straw man. You're just building a fake apparition of what you believe, or what your opposition is, in a way, and it's not even something they would agree with. And then we build our straw man, and we light them on fire, and they go up really quickly, and we get cheers of all the people we agree with.
Right.
But the better approach that we seem to ignore is what's called steel manning. Essentially trying to make the case for our opposition, whatever it may be, and then and then we start to make ours and like dismantle theirs.
So you called that what?
Steel manning.
That sounds a lot like the Socratic method, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same
100%.
thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because the Socratic method is something you like learn in like English, and like I remember learning about Socratic method is basically like for me and you are having an argument.
Yep.
Is before we even started the actual debate or argument towards this different thing, I had to present your understanding of your take. And you had to agree on what I said, and then you had to do that to me. So basically, we both have to come to terms as this is what you're saying, and this is what I'm saying, and then we could be okay. Game on. Then we can go.
Otherwise, we're just talking around each other, and we're not really addressing what
Yeah, because we have these presupposed thoughts of what I think you think, and you have those of what I think. If we don't actually establish, because like I could say something and you can interpret that way differently, but and you can put words in my mouth that were never there, and that's what happens a lot of times in these kind of things. Is you see that all throughout. Is like people will say things, but then taken way out of context.
Yeah. I mean, think about kind of political discussions around the border. If a conservative wants to make an argument against the Biden administration, it's typically in terms of, they have this open borders policy that they're trying to push. They wouldn't even agree with you on that. So what are you really arguing against? Or I don't know. You could think of any number of things. Well, like for example, when it comes to abortion, like they just want to murder babies. Like would they agree with you on that? Because that's what we have to figure out, like what their position actually is. But sometimes we don't care to ask the questions to figure out what their position is. We'd rather just have a pundit tell us what their position is, and then we fight that thing. But so yeah. Thank you for bringing up Socratic method.
Yeah, well, that's what I first, like when you said it, I never heard it the way you said it, but then I was like, oh, that's what this is.
Yeah, just a different way of looking at it. But we talked about also that following Jesus isn't just about believing the right things. Somewhere along the line, we've simplified, following Jesus to just, we ask Jesus into our heart and we believe certain things like, okay, yeah, let's say we believe in the resurrection and atonement of Christ. Like we believe in these certain things for sure. But then we, go out and like live different lives. And that's, anyone who's out there just like, oh, okay, yeah, you can't say you're a follower of Jesus and be out here sleeping around all over the place when you're married and doing all this different, like we know that cognitively, but it's because we put different things in different categories. We'll go lie and we'll be dishonest and we'll slander people, but we're not out doing that. So it's okay. But right belief must always be accompanied by right living. That was the whole thing of James.
Yeah, and I just thought about this too. Is like that's kind of even going back to what I talked about on Easter. Is like what we're trying to desire is to be a safe place for people, and that's why a lot of people have wrestled with the church is because they've seen a false view or like a very skewed view of like what we're trying to be. We're people who are trying to,
or the what we're presenting is what they're seeing.
Yeah, what we're presenting, or unknowingly we're presenting is like, hey, we'll say we're loving and caring and all these different things, and that we will thank God for what He's done for us, and we'll go to church, and we'll do all these different things. But yeah, then when we leave here, and then our actions reveal something else, and so we have the right beliefs, but wrong behavior, or behavior that's resulting in these kind of things of slander, as in rage and dishonesty, and that's like something. And then he lists out several other things too, but Paul does in this passage. But that was one of the thoughts I just had is like that's why this matters, and why we continue to talk about why we do a series like this is because it does, like, your actions really, really do matter right now, and how we go through this, because Paul's going to say in later, and he's like, well, what's the opposite? You put to death your old self. Well, then what's the new self? And that's like kind of like where we'll get to more. I believe we'll get into this week, right, in the series, or
say again.
Well, we'll get into like the put on, like the verse 12.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about this week.
Yeah. Basically what this looks like for us to actually engage in difficult things, how we're supposed to do that. We'll see that later. Because
we can lose respect with the prior ones, and then this one is like, how do we gain respect? Okay, I'm there now.
Yeah. In a sense, we're going to talk about exactly that. But yeah, when we reduce following Jesus to just believing the right things and simplify it down to that actually frees us up to act ridiculous and slander people and mock people, because our actions don't matter as much if we just say we believe something. So that's why right belief must always be accompanied by right living. Another thing I'd thought of, and I had when you're putting together a message, Pierce, you know this. Often we have a lot more things that may be able to fit, but you kind of have to quote unquote trim the fat and make sure like everything is just pointing to like what's the goal of what you're trying to accomplish with this specific message, what's the text teaching, and then kind of trim out everything else. Yeah. One other thing that came up as I was studying and putting my thoughts together is that we're called to, when it comes to this idea of dishonesty specifically, is we're called to love our God with all our heart, with our soul, and with all our mind. And loving God with all our mind requires honesty. It requires critical thinking because we want to represent Jesus well and what his values are, what his kingdom is like. And so we hear that we're to love our God with all of our mind, and we'll say yes and amen, but I think it's really easy for us to operate outside of our mind when it comes to politics and completely ignore all of it. If you hear stuff in the background, that is just, we got a windstorm outside right now.
I thought our roof was about to blow away.
Yeah,
right there.
At any point in time, the literally might blow the roof off this thing. And
if you hear us yell, that's probably
if we
what
get picked up and taken away.
That's how committed we are to this podcast.
We are sticking through it. So we can just operate outside of our mind when it comes to politics, and we're called to love God with all of our mind, and so it takes critical thinking, it takes honesty. So slander, rage, dishonesty will cause us to lose respect within or with outsiders, but we just kind of juxtaposed those with compassion, gentleness, and honesty. Those are going to be the type of things that help us gain respect. And so we just finished up and said, what is the faith of your neighbor worth to you? And it's a really if you actually start to think about what I would give up to see my neighbor come to know Jesus, that can get really uncomfortable really quickly. And like I said on Sunday, Pierce, I'm praying for you. As many of you know, he's my neighbor, and we've been trying to invite him to church and everything. But what is the faith of our neighbor worth to us? Or what is the faith of the next generation worth to us? Because they're watching. Our world is watching. The next generation is watching. They're taking cues from us. And so my hope and where we finished was that we would be able to take our own version of Colossians 3:11 and kind of contextualize it to where we're at right now, because we don't talk about Jews and Gentiles and slave and free, but we're saying here in this church, in this place, there's no Republican or Democrat, conservative or progressive, but Christ is all and is in all. That's where we wrapped up. That's my prayer for our church, is that as we come through these doors, it's not that we cease to be those things, but they are now secondary identifiers for us because we're Christians first. Now, a few other thoughts that kind of go along this. We're going to dive into a couple other areas, but again, kind of areas where I had to trim and be like, okay, we can't. This isn't going to help, this specific message. But 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23 is, I think, a really good example of what our engagement with our culture can look like. Can you read 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23?
Yeah, so starting verse 19. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. That's a lot of laws right there. Verse 21. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. That was a lot. Okay, verse 22. Yeah. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. Oh, dude, I'm struggling right now. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings.
Yeah. The overall principle in this that Paul is trying to get to is verse 22. Read that again. So that way, really the second half of 22.
22b. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some.
Right. Now, if you want to kind of misinterpret the words of Paul and run in an opposite direction of what he's trying to communicate, you can say, well, does this mean I'm just supposed to go, I go out to, this means I go out to strip clubs and I go out to bars and I get drunk and I get, no. In every one of these situations, if you read through it, it's not what Paul put on to go and do this. It's what he chose to give up in order to win some. It is a self-sacrificing way in which he went about all of these things so that by all possible means he might be able to save some. He made himself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible.
I've never heard it put that way. Like, that's very clever. Like, it's just like it's because we think he's adding all these different things. He's just doing whatever he wants, like all these different things. But there's such a like, no, he's giving up this aspect for this purpose. Yeah. And I just never heard it that way. But like, I feel like a lot of people when they hear this, they have like a different response, like a gut like reaction. It's like, he's not really picking a side necessarily. Like he's kind of just like, like sitting on the fence or something, and he's kind of like in between. Like he has 1 foot here, 1 foot there. Like he's kind of going back and forth. So like, what would you say like in response to that? Yeah,
like he's being a fence sitter. Is like, well, shouldn't he just go to the Jews and tell the Jews what the actual truth is and tell them where they're wrong? Shouldn't he go to all these different people and tell them where they're wrong? All those different things. I think in what often happens, and when we look at it and say, "Come on, Paul, why you can't just stand in the middle here? You're just being a people pleaser. You got to stand on some truth here." I think in our cultural climate, it's easy to see someone like Paul and criticize them, because I think if Paul were to do this in our day to the Republicans, I became like a Republican. I gave up certain things, making certain things my priority, so that I could talk with these people. And develop a relationship. To the Democrats, I became as a Democrat. It's not like you're just going undercover and going to all these, like going to the DNC, Democratic National Convention, undercover to try, like, no, you're just saying I'm setting aside things that are not of kingdom priority, so that I can actually develop a relationship with these people. And I think often we can see somebody like a Paul, if he was doing something like that, it'd be like, it's just being woke. Just being a liberal, this guy. He's just being, he's what's the, like a fascist sympathizer, a Nazi sympathizer. He's just, he can't stand on anything. You can't be a fence sitter. You can't play both sides. You have to take a stand for truth. I think that's much of what we would hear, and we just kind of label someone to dismiss them. Tell me if that sounds familiar. If we just label someone as woke, if we just label someone as a Nazi or a fascist, if we just label them as things, we don't actually have to engage with their ideas. We don't actually have to have any discussion with them.
And then going back earlier, it makes it way easier to like talk bad about them. Unfortunately, it makes it like we feel justified in slandering. But like that's what happens. Like that's the uncomfortable part about this, and it's like how our responses to them and about them. Yeah. Like, and then that's where we can get to this echo chamber where people can just like this is what we're doing. Like by us doing this, the ends is way better. Yeah. Because people aren't going to listen to them, you know? And it's like, ooh.
Yeah. There's like the a line, we talked about on Sundays, that you can't make disciples of people that you demonize. If we're looking to evangelize and point people to Jesus, we can't make disciples of people that we in our hearts we demonize, or we publicly demonize, because then they see that and they're like, I want nothing to do with that. Like we can't actually move the needle like Paul's talking about here. He's like, I'm doing all this so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah, because going back to the actual text here, it's like he has all these people who are under the law. And so then if he's going to his like fellow Jews who are under the law, that's what they've studied, that's what they went to, they've grown up going to the synagogue all their life, this is what they've known. And he says, hey, just forget all that. Just, you don't worry about that. Go under Christ's law. And like he doesn't meet them there. Yeah. Like to kind of understand, that's kind of what he does through Romans. He kind of unpacks like the law and how like Christ's fulfillment of that, like all this different stuff. If he just, cause he's like, just throw that all in the garbage, like move on to like Christ, like that's not going to mean anything to them. Yeah. And then the same thing, if you go to people who have no background or context in that, and then you say, hey, you have this law, come to Christ's law, they're going to be like, do what now? Yeah. Like I have, and then you're going to have people like in like Paul, they'll be like, you have to get circumcised first to become a believer. And then like, he's like, whoa. Wait a minute.
I gotta do what?
Yeah, and so like because they're not meeting, they weren't meeting them in the middle. So that's what Paul's trying to do is like, hey, he's trying to get them to where they're at, so that way he can bring them along and create kind of some kind of equity with them, and like this understanding of like, hey, I see where you're at, I understand where you're coming from. It's this back to the Socratic method. Like I see your position. Yeah, and I'm gonna.
He was that person. He was a Pharisaical Jew. Like that's who he was. I don't necessarily need to add more to that. That's exactly it. But I think our culture, whether it be conservative or progressive, would have you believe that you cannot love people and build relationships with people without leading with the truth in every moment. Like you can't go and love people on the other side without making sure they know what the quote unquote truth is. We see this with, if you want to get into the more, it's a loaded term, but into the more kind of social justice warrior type that we visualize, that people are screaming at other people or constantly calling people out when they don't have a relationship with them. It's going to be that more on the left side. On the right side, you have this kind of conservative culture that says, hey, the most loving thing I can do is tell them the truth. I have to do this. Not realizing that to do that, to lead with the truth, I think takes so much wisdom and a checking of our own hearts before we're to do something like that. That's yeah.
Yeah, and if you have like this like shared like understanding of relationship and love for one another, it makes those conversations easier. But definitely like I was just thinking about this. Like if you had like let's say there was like this like thing, this like blind spot in my brother's life that who's someone I love deeply, and like he knows I love him and he loves me, and yet I had to address something with him. That still doesn't make it easy. You know, but then it's like it makes that much more weight to what I have to say. It's like I know how hard this is and how difficult this is, but it's because I love you. You know, that's a way different starting point than.
And I care about you because I have a relationship with you.
You know this, but if to someone I don't have that with, and you know, if I no relationship or no understanding or no background or no context for any kind of individual, like what I have to say is not going to have any weight whatsoever.
Yeah, we've become, as it's called, just hammers in search of nails. That was the Roxane Gay quote from New York Times that was shared on Sunday. Is that for many of us, the hammer is the only tool that is being taught and encouraged within our culture, and being lifted up is the most helpful. And so we're just hammers running around trying to destroy everything in our path and use that. But a hammer it isn't the most appropriate tool for every purpose. We know this. You're not going to go try to lay tile in your bathroom with a hammer. Hopefully not. But a person with only a hammer is likely to try to fix everything with a hammer, and without considering other options. So we would often rather prefer to do, conflict resolve, to walk through these issues with the one thing that we know, rather than looking for a better alternative, because those things take work. Learning a Socratic method, as you say, or learning to steel man someone else's argument and say, is this the actual argument? Is this the actual thing I'm trying to engage with? That takes a while, and that takes work. When just dunking on people is a lot easier.
Yeah, and the hard thing about why that takes so much work is because when someone's explaining their viewpoint, if it's different from you, you immediately like you start thinking, oh, how can I debunk this? How can I create these arguments as they're talking?
You're listening to respond.
Yeah. I'm listening to respond, and that's what, that's conversation. Like you have to respond. Like that's dialogue. But like instead of like if we're disagreeing, like if I'm already thinking like this is how he's so wrong, but I'm not even listening to what you have to say.
Right.
And so that's like the whole aspect of this is like for us to have the most amount of weight with our words and the truth we do have. This is why this matters, is because they feel heard by you, and you understand them. Because if you don't, they don't feel heard or understood. Then what are we doing?
Yeah, and this idea of just leading with truth in every moment is it's just a failure to recognize the human condition of people, or just recognize the humanity of other people. Because if somebody did that with you, you wouldn't respond well. But we think we have to. We have to lead with a truth and an authority that they don't recognize. And like God can hold them to that. accountable for that. That's not my job. And so I want to be as careful as I can. But often when we're leading with truth, we're just focusing on really holding people outside of the church and kind of the outside world to a standard that they have not agreed to or don't acknowledge. And Russell Moore, who used to be part of the SBC,
the Southern Baptist Convention.
You can find a little bit more info on him if you would like. The resources that I mentioned earlier for Jesus, Church, and Politics. There is a podcast or a book and an online course that you can take called The After Party that Russell Moore was a part in developing. But I encourage you to go look that up. And he said, in regards to addressing, often our focus is trying to fix the outside world, and it seems like what we see in Scripture, the focus of Jesus, the focus of Paul, the focus of a lot of the even the prophets in the Old Testament, God has a different focus. And so he says this, which is worse in Scripture, the pagan idols of the nations around Israel, or the golden calves that Jeroboam placed at Bethel and Dan? Is it a bigger deal in the Bible that the nations are idolatrous, or that there's idolatry inside of Israel? Jesus had far more in common with the Pharisees than he did the tax collectors, but his harshest criticisms are toward the religious leaders. Why? Because these guys sit in Moses' seat. Essentially, they teach the law. In the big scheme of world politics, which matters more? An entire empire given over to sexual and cultural immorality, as well as the worship of a whole pantheon of false gods, or one tiny gathering of Christians in a seaport town ignoring their own members' misbehaviors? The Apostle Paul argued that it was the latter.
Man, that is such a good quote.
It's really powerful. And I mentioned it kind of in passing that Paul's focus and Jesus's focus is primarily on the behavior of those that already claim Jesus or claim the way of God, not on those outside. And so often when we're talking about this world, we'll focus on the sins or compare it to like a Sodom and Gomorrah, and we'll just totally ignore the insides, the sins of the inside of the house of God.
Yeah, we just think, gosh, man, it wasn't always like this, and it's so bad out there that the nation's just going downhill. Like culture is just so evil and all these different things. And there's definitely parts. Yes. Yeah. Like we see the corruptness because but part of what I think is so cool about this quote, and for us just as a reminder, is like, yes, while that may be true. Mm-hmm. And going back to week 1 of the series, like what's at the issue in these? Yeah, it's idolatry. Yeah, and so we have to be careful in ourselves if we want to create a unified front to be a place for people to find rest and to be renewed and to be restored. Is like we need to be careful in that front. Like, are we more concerned about the outside than we are about the inside? Yeah. And because what we do on the inside definitely matters, not just personally, but also corporately. Yeah. So as a church, what we're doing inside our walls, which is we're equipping the saints for the work of ministry, we're connecting with one another, we're loving one another, we're building this community that's built on love, that built on Christ's love for us. And so if we're not doing that, and we're just focusing on the outside and not focusing on what's inside, like, what did Jesus say about the Pharisees? You're just whitewashed tombs. Yeah. Like, you're pretty on the outside.
Yeah, you look good.
But you're just dead bones on the inside. Yeah. And that's why, like, our prayer is this. Like, we want to be a church that focuses on that. We want to be intentional with how we live our lives. And part of, like, we get so caught up in all the outside stuff, and it's like, yes, like it can get distracting. It can get, you get really
the
low.
Culture wars, all that different stuff. Yeah, we get caught up in it.
But all we're wanting is for us to see there's a different way forward. Yeah. And it's not easy by any means. Like, it's not easy. It's hard. It's hard for us to tell you that. Like, it's hard for us to be like, it's not going to get better.
Yeah, and again, if we believe the kingdom is built from the bottom up, then we do have to start here, and we have to start even close. We have to start with our own heart, And then we have to look in our churches, we have to call a spade and work on representing Jesus well here within these walls before we try to fix anything outside these walls.
Yeah, and one of the things that like I read, I think, is like a podcast we were listening to, is that like a lot of times people with like Russell Moore is that he always punches right but never punches left.
Yeah.
And that's like his biggest critique. And but there's a reason why he comes from the right camp. You know, he's from a Southern Baptist convention. That's where I come from. It's like you're definitely more on the conservative side, and so his biggest critique from people on his same camp, who he would be in his tribe, call him. He only punches right, never punches left. Meaning he always attacks us and not them, not the culture outside. Yeah. But that's where it's getting. That's what the whole quote he had.
Yeah,
it's like these are his people.
Yeah,
who he wants to call, like to say, hey, your behaviors now.
Yeah,
people are seeing this.
Yeah,
and it's like he's not affirming or like saying this
we
is great.
We don't ignore
outside.
the sins of our world.
Yeah,
we just it's just a matter of what seems to be the most important is we gotta do some heart checking before we go out and start screaming at the culture. We really got to check our own hearts.
Yeah, and that doesn't like, and even by us checking our hearts is not us saying that like you can't go share the gospel either. Like people, a lot of times people are like, they'll just sit and they'll be like, okay, I'm working on myself.
I'm just checking on my heart.
You know, I'm just I'm checking my heart. I'm gonna grow, and then I'll get there eventually. Yeah. And but even by that thinking too is we're still missing the command that Jesus gives us is to go out and share the gospel.
Yeah. And you're not gonna do it perfectly, but the call's never been perfection. It's progress.
Right.
Keep movement step by step, moving closer, being more in step with Jesus. That's what he longs for. It's interesting for us, like as a people who are living in this world, surrounded by the brokenness of our world, living directly in it. I think we can take some from the words of a prophet named Jeremiah, and I want you to look at what God says. You know, He says, "Hey, you messed up, Israel." Speaking to Israel, you're in exile, and Jeremiah speaking on behalf of God. 29 verse 4. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. These are words of God here. Verse 5. Build houses, settle down. Basically, you're going to be there a while. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Don't decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now that goes on, and we know Jeremiah 29:11. We're like, that's us, that's America, that's my life. This is speaking to Israel. This is not speaking to Americans in the 21st century. So don't take a verse out of context.
Right.
For the Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, all this different stuff. He's talking about these people here who are in exile, who are in the middle of it, the thick of it.
Into the thick of it.
Stop it. And they're planted essentially in. He wants them to see you're exiled, sure, but you are in the middle of a mission field, and God gave him these instructions. This is what he said: "Hey, I want you to build houses. I want you to settle down. I want you to plant gardens. I want you to work for the good of the city, because if it prospers, you prosper. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city." Now, how we do that, we can talk about that. But for us today, we are kingdom people now. And similarly, we are waiting for our future home. So what do? Well, we pray for our city. We work for the good of our city. And what's unique about our position, Jesus has come. He's provided a way of salvation, something that was future to these people, the Israelite people in Jeremiah, but is now past for us. Is that God is now using us to build his kingdom here on this earth, and we are right where God wants us. He has placed you in your work. He has placed you in your hobbies. He has placed you with the influence that you do have to make him known. Again, this is a bottom up. The kingdom is built not from the Oval Office down. We get the right person in, it's fixed. No, it's built from the bottom up. How you interact with the people around you. Because if you're not caring for those in the sphere around you, this kingdom will never be built.
Yeah. We were in our small group a couple weeks ago, and one of our small group members, they were talking about like they had a work situation that popped up, and it was basically for a month and a half of just like did not know what the Lord's going to do, did not have clarity. Dream job was like being taken away and all these different things, and then all of a sudden, like after a month and a half of just praying, no clarity, God just kind of worked and moved, and she's placed in, she got, which now is actually her dream job, and she got to do. And then I remember the very next thing she said when she's saying that, and she's like, and the only thought I could think of is how can I make God's love known with the position I'm at. I was so focused on this other place, but how can I make God's love known here? And then someone else shared another opportunity that they had, and she said, no, you can impact people there too. Like, it's like this is this different mindset of like, you could lose a job and you have to go work somewhere else. And it's like, but if you look at it differently, it's like, okay, God's placed you somewhere else now.
He's entrusted you with your position to make his name known in that place. And what you do with that, I think really entails how much, or what you do with that influence that you have now. You can go. There's plenty of parables that kind of go after this point. But if you're not going to use the influence you have now, why would you expect more? Because again, you got to remember the purpose of why you're here. So just a couple questions as we finish up. Last couple thoughts. I want you in again with this mindset of a bottom up, not top down. Building His kingdom, remembering why we're here. Here's a question for you. How much do you think about the election? Stop there. How much do you think about the election? And then contrast that. When was the last time you had your neighbor over for dinner, or your coworker over for dinner, or your friend that doesn't know Jesus over for dinner? How much do you think about getting the right person in office and electoral politics? And when was the last time you invited that person over for dinner and actually started to build a relationship, a meaningful relationship with them? You know what I've found with Pearson, maybe you've seen this too, as we go around online or even in person, our shouting that we do and yelling at one another. You know what that never ends with? Wow, thank you for that insight. That is so good. Thank you. Can we grab lunch sometime? I've never seen that happen. I don't. Maybe you've seen differently than me.
I avoid conflict as much as possible. So doing comments and like different like that gives me anxiety.
Good. Yeah.
I know you. I know you're not bothered by it, but man, like just like when I was on a pastor's page and I was seeing drama unfold, and like I get like secondhand like conflict, and I create it in my own head. So like I don't need help with that.
Yeah. But that's the thing. None of those comment battles and all that different stuff. It never ends with, hey, can we go grab lunch? Can we actually get eyeball to eyeball here and talk about real life things and get to know one another and see the humanity in one another? No, we're just what is called keyboard warriors, and we just pop off online and or even yelling in person, like outside of some establishment or something we're going to boycott. You know what that never ends with? Hey, let's meet up and let's talk.
Yeah, and even the after party resource you mentioned earlier, I've been working through that, and that's actually a literal story, and it was like a well-known like pro-choice like supporter, and basically she was a higher up, and she was like advocating, and she was bashing this one pastor, and who's like one of the pastors that are in it, and David French, I think is his last name, basically just well known. And so then it was during COVID, and then she couldn't get groceries. She was posting all these different things, and like she's like basically just couldn't, because where they were living, but they lived right down the road. And so his wife actually messaged her and said, hey, how can I help? And so then she got to meet the guy she's been bashing online for years, delivering her groceries. And then now they even interview her in that episode, and like we're still friends. We don't agree, but we can still talk about it. But it's because she went out of her way. She's like, I didn't believe in God, and but they did, and they prayed with me. And so just people, polar opposites, how God can still use that to bring people together. And it's like then they still don't agree, but they can have a relationship now. And so that's where it's like you can see the implications of that. So that's a plug for the after party resource.
Okay, good. I like the things that I've read on the after party, especially if you're just trying to figure out what a new way forward for you is with politics, what this can look like. It's a great resource to start with. But again, that question, how much do you think about the election? And then when was the last time you had your neighbor over for dinner? I just hope, I hope that doesn't generate tension in you because you are actively involved in those around you, but it may create that because how much we engage with those around us really shows how much we believe this is still top down and not bottom up. If we're not engaging, it shows what we really believe about how the kingdom is built. I think our desire for power politically shows us all we need to know about how much we value our influence with others. So just think about that and, let it lead you to action, hopefully, and and choose to maybe engage. I don't know, fully honest, I don't know that I've invited someone over for dinner and they've just straight up been like, nah. It's been, let's find a date to do it. Like, I can't tonight. There's been that, but it's never been like, no, I don't want to do that. Never. So this is important, guys. But any last thoughts? Any other things you want to add?
No, I feel like every week you always ask me what some other thoughts you had, and then sometimes I have them, but if I don't write them down, I don't remember them. So, but I don't have that right now.
Okay, that's cool. Well, guys, thank you for joining us today. This has been the Equip. Actually, before I throw it to that, encourage you to go. This series has been really fun to think through and engage with. Encourage you to look into it. This next week will be kind of the last week there, and then in a couple weeks we start a series going through
Psalms.
It's 150 weeks to go with every psalm. No, it's not. I don't even know how long it's going to be, but it'll take us through
12 to 13 weeks.
12 to 13 weeks through part of the summer up into the summer. And we'll also have some guest speakers come in after that. So looking forward to where we're going to go from here. But we just kind of want to set our year up in a sense with how we're going to try to approach ministry and loving our neighbors. So anyway, again, this has been the Equip Podcast, equipping you to live out your Christian life as you faithfully love God and love others with truth and grace. So now let's go do it.